to the, who's behind us?
All right, ready. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the August 5th, 2014 work session for the Board of Education. Today we're here to discuss, I guess, the first round of our discussions of student achievement results. MSA results, HSA results are here. There are some others, AP and SAT, which are not quite complete yet. So this will be the first of a couple of reports. I think the only one we'll probably have in a work session format. As a leadership team, I think we decided the work session format made the most sense for this because, after all, student achievement is what all of us are here for, and all the other things that go on in our organization are designed to support that, whether it's finance, human resources, policy, facilities. Really, it's ultimately about making sure students can succeed. So with that as background, I will go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Wilcox to provide the report to the board.
Thank you very much. What I hope to do today is engage the board in a conversation around kind of the general health of our school district in terms of our ability to promote and increase student achievement. To do that, I've asked Dr. Domain to pull her team together over the last few days and weeks to talk about the data. But I don't want them to spend a whole lot of time just going over data, although it will be a huge part of what they present today. I'm interested in your hearing what their insights are given the data that they have. I think they will talk to you a little bit today about some of the initiatives that have been entered into based on some of what they've seen in the data. For example, the math team will talk about why they've chosen to move to Agile Mind as a way to help expand our ability to teach and reach kids using an up-to-date technology around the area of algebraic thinking and algebra. Other teams will talk about some of the initiatives that they have as well. It's all part of kind of helping the board to see how all the things that we're doing fit together to better serve kids. At the same time we're going to do this, we are going to acknowledge some of our warts. One of the things that we've told you repeatedly over the last 2 years is that there would be a dip as we move from MSA to the new PARCC assessments to the Maryland Common Core. I think we've seen some of that, and we have asked ourselves internally some questions. Was our dip greater than others? Was ours lesser than others? And did that matter across different subject matter? Was it different in math and science? Was it, in math and English language arts? What did our science results look like this year? So I'm going to ask Dr. Domain to come up. She's going to bring up members of her team. I'm going to slide around the table just to make sure that there's plenty of room for the team to come up. But then Dr. Domain will facilitate the conversation with each of you. At some point I may jump back in, but right now this is a time for you to visit with the instructional team. Okay?
Just for the benefit of board members, I assume based on your introduction you'd like this to be more of a dialogue rather than a hold your questions to the end type situation. I know board members have lots of questions, and I just want to make sure they all have the opportunity to ask them.
I think that board members, we want a dialogue. We want some back and forth about why do you think this? How did you get to that conclusion? We absolutely want that kind of conversation. To the extent that you know of other practices in other districts that you want us to be aware of, we certainly want to hear that at the appropriate time, which is during the discussion. But I trust all of you because you've either been in a classroom or a business environment where that sometimes you got to let somebody finish the sentence that they're in before you ask that next question, so that train of thought gets pulled out. So if you would let Dr. Domain kind of shuffle around, she'll be very attendant to who wants to say something when. But yes, right during the conversation is the best.
Good morning. Our purpose here today is, as Dr. Wilcox has said, to share with you sort of the state of our schools. We want to share this information to you, with you so that you can see the health of our district as it relates to our students' academic performance, but then also to share with you some data that we see as indicators of the health of our school culture and school environment. We will also share with you our response to the data. We are responsive to it, and the initiatives and strategies that we have in place have confirmed in many instances why we have chosen to do the things that we have prioritized. And so I'll let you know at the outset that in general we are in good health. but there are some areas in which we still have room for improvement. And so those are the things that we will talk to you about today. We believe, however, that we are on the right course, meaning that we have the right instructional supports both for students and for our teachers, and that we have some very good instructional materials to help get that work done. And so we will begin then with our school environment and culture indicators. Just in brief, we will tell you that our students have maintained their historical achievement levels as it relates to attendance. The attendance rate remains above 90%, and our trend has been to see a decrease in the number of out-of-school suspensions. We've seen that trend over the past 3 years. Specifically, you can see our attendance rate for this past year for both for elementary, middle, and high school. And as you can see, both the elementary and the high school students, their rates exceeded the state's. There was a bit of a dip at the middle school level. They scored just a little bit below the state, but the overall attendance rate has remained at 95%. This is what it was last year. So we are glad to have that high attendance rate. We believe that that is due to our attention to school culture, making sure that we are having meaningful relationships with students, that students feel comfortable coming to school, that they are meaningfully engaged in the classroom, that they want to come to school. We've been talking about the relevance of what they are learning. Again, doing all of those things that make school a place where students want to be.
Dr. Domain,
Yes, ma'am.
before you leave attendance, I know that Baltimore County recently completed a survey of September attendance per student, and they were able to then trend that through the whole year, track it, to where if a student missed a certain number of days in September, they could almost predict exactly the attendance of that student throughout the year. And it helped them to get an early intervention with those children having problems being at school and ready to learn. Are you aware of that survey, or do we have anything similar where we found that correlation between September attendance and the rest of the year?
I have not seen that particular survey. I am familiar with, of course, all of the research as it relates to early warning indicators, and that's certainly one of them. We know that at 10 days, a student in general will perform at least one grade level below where they should. And if we're talking about a student that's starting behind already, then that puts them in double jeopardy of not being successful. Some of our schools, because of, for example, the PBIS programs and other programs such as that we have in place, some of our schools are tracking attendance as an early warning indicator very closely. Mr. Akers can probably give you more information about that. But again, we know that 10, and we ask why is 10 that magic number? Well, it's approximately 10% of the school year. If you miss that much, again, the researchers have shown that that's the point where students, they are more prone to fall that one grade level behind where they ought to be. Mr. Akers, do you have it?
Rather than using September data, although that sounds interesting, I'd like to see it, we use the previous year's data. Students who had attendance issues the previous year, then we start over the summer. Schools typically do home visits and do their school-based efforts to ensure that the student's going to have better attendance the following year. But also this year, our student services team, primarily the PPWs, have been going out and making home visits with students who had attendance issues last year, and especially at the very low grade levels, looking at, trying to set students up for, career success. And as far as attendance goes, they've been visiting the homes, providing a book for the student, and providing literature to the parents on the importance of school attendance, but also information on our summer meals program and library programs and different things that were available during the summer. So there's been sort of a concerted effort on the part of the student services team to really reach out to those very young students who are already showing some of the early warning signs of concerns with truancy and low attendance. Then the schools are usually very involved in summer visits, their assistant principals and principals with students who the previous year had chronic attendance issues. So.
We'll continue with our school environment indicators, taking a look at our discipline data. You will see that the trend has been to have a decline in the number of out-of-school suspensions. This particular slide breaks down the out-of-school suspensions by grade, and if you're looking at this slide the way that we looked at it, of course, the first thing that we saw was this. It seems to be an inordinate number of suspensions at the 9th grade. We know that that is a transition year for students. We know that we have put in some specific supports in schools for 9th graders to help them make that transition from 8th to 9th. And again, PBIS is among some of those strategies that have been put into place to assist 9th graders. I want you to know, however, that even though this number appears to be inordinately disproportionate to the other grade levels, the next slide shows the decline over the past 3 years as it relates to specifically 9th grade out-of-school suspensions. So again, while it may look to be disproportionate when we're comparing it to the other grades for this specific school year, over the past years, you can see that the number of suspensions has declined. So again, we believe that we're doing some good things as it relates to culture, environment, and supporting 9th graders to help that number continue to decrease. Yes, ma'am.
Dr. Domain, is that data disaggregated so that we know if there are certain types of incidents that are more likely to be happening with our 9th graders? And do we know, is it a particular school that we have more 9th graders who are experiencing difficulties? Is it city schools as opposed to county schools? Is it something that's evenly distributed? Have we looked at that kind of information with regard to that 150-some students?
We do have that data disaggregated. Maureen, can you join us at the table? I asked Maureen for a breakdown of the incident by grade level, and she can speak to that.
We haven't looked specifically at different grade levels, but we do look at the different incidents that contribute to the out-of-school suspensions in terms of what students are being suspended for. And we can look at it based on, we look at it overall for elementary, middle, and high, and then we see what contributes to those numbers.
So to build on that point, not only do they look at it by incident, whether it's assault, whether it's verbal altercation, whether it's insubordination. I think there are 20 or 30 different categories that we segment discipline to. We can provide that, and we look at it by school as well. And I think we can also look at it a variety of other ways for the board. So we look at it in terms of disproportionate minority discipline as well. Who was more likely to be suspended for the same offenses. So,
If I could, I'd add that we look at that monthly in our meetings with principals, that they are each principal of each school to, kind of address that part of your question, that we track it by school. Now, but every school tracks it sort of the same way in that we look at the disaggregated data so that each school can see, which issues they're addressing. They look at it by grade level, by disaggregated group, and also by the different violations that cause students to be suspended. We've made great strides, as the data has shown over the last few years with our suspension data, and we have one of the lowest, if not the lowest, per capita suspension rate in the state. I haven't looked at every single county, but I've glanced at all of them, and I've looked closely at our neighboring counties, and we have by far the lowest per capita suspension rate, meaning the number of suspensions per student that we have. And I think our next steps, and we'll be getting to that slide next, are looking. You can see how we look at the disaggregated information to see if one group of students is being suspended more frequently than others. And we've begun to address that issue because we've really lowered the total number of suspensions and the reasons for suspensions. Part of that is the board's changes to our discipline policy and the combined changes to the regulations and guidelines for the use of suspension and other consequences for students. But we've reached that point now where rather than just focusing on lowering the number of suspensions, we're now trying to, target the improvements to those groups.
Advance to the next slide so that the board members can see the types of suspensions we track, and then quickly move to look at how we disaggregate some of the data among racial and ethnic groups.
Yes, sir.
I think they really do want to get to the instructional part too.
Okay. Well, again, these are the top incidents, and you can see that fighting leads that particular group. I will let you know that it's not just about suspension. It's about trying to help students make better decisions so that this does not recur. So students are counseled. There are tiered interventions in place to assist students. So again, we don't have these types of behaviors recur. This next slide shows some of the different ways that we look at data, and this is how we determine who is more likely committing these offenses. Now, I do need to clarify just a bit on this slide. This does not represent a percentage of students. This slide represents actually the percentage of incidents committed by particular subgroups. So, for example, 37%, approximately 37% of the incidents with out-of-school suspensions involved one or more African American students. So that's what this slide is conveying. Again, when looking at this data, we simply understand that we need to make sure that we have a school culture that is inviting, that has clear expectations, that has ways for reinforcing the desirable behavior that we would like to see. And we also, again, work very hard to make sure that we are cognizant of the data to keep that in mind.
Dr. Demay,
Yes.
could you go back to the bar graph, the one right before that one? Thank you. With the new Code of Discipline guidelines that the State Board voted on a couple weeks ago, I didn't know if our staff had time to, they set up their own categories and we're supposed to align with their categories, and they've collapsed a lot of these. They've set levels and consequences and so forth, and I didn't know if how this bar graph may be reflected differently if they collapse categories, and how we're going to react to those new guidelines. I didn't know if you'd had a chance to
Mr.
think about
Akers
that.
has worked with principals with that new policy.
And with Carol Costello in Student Services, and we've modeled our own guidelines very closely with what the state
With the new
is doing
ones?
with the new ones.
Okay.
And we've been sort of doing that, we've been trying to stay ahead of the curve the last couple of years because, we hear these things are coming, through various meetings, and we've tried to stay ahead of it. And I think that's why we've seen a lot of the progress that we've made. Some of you who've been around for a few years can probably remember when you look at things like disrespect and insubordination, they used to make up the vast majority of the reasons for suspension, and now, they're quite small, and it's the far more serious, issues of fighting and those types of things that stand out as the reasons for suspension.
The reason I'm saying, if we look at fighting, which obviously is the largest, tallest bar, and physical attack students, okay, those two, I think they're collapsed together now in the guidelines, and the guidelines, whether we consider them mandates or not, is another discussion, but they're respectfully suggesting that many of those not be out-of-school suspensions. So the concern is, how do we balance the safety of the school and the climate of the school with needing to keep more students who have lost control in the classroom or in the school?
Yeah, it's definitely been evolving and continues to evolve. I think there's been, my perception has been that it was getting almost militant and prescriptive, I should say, I guess. But it seems like there's a little more latitude that I've heard recently for schools and school districts to make decisions on behalf of school safety, where students may have to be suspended, a little more recognition. I don't know that we're going to reach 0 suspensions anytime soon, but we certainly have expanded our alternatives to suspension. Again, the decline in the number of suspensions that we're seeing is been pretty phenomenal. So.
Excuse me, I have a question
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, ma'am.
about the bar graph also. I'm wondering if we could get a school-by-school analysis of which events are taking place. You mentioned school environment, so I think that would help contribute to our understanding of maybe what's going on in each particular school and the dynamics within the school. So if there would be a possibility of getting these listed by schools, the incidents, I would appreciate it.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Finally, this final slide does show the overall trend that we've been discussing. You can see the drop in the number of suspensions from 2009 until currently. You can see the biggest drop has happened in high school. And it is not because we are now more tolerant of behavior that is not acceptable. It's that we have alternatives to suspension, as Mr. Akers alluded to just a few minutes before. We still have high expectations for our students. We expect our students to respect their teachers. We expect for learning to occur in the classroom. We expect a culture that is conducive for learning. We support that by reinforcing the positive behavior that we expect to see. We have interventions in place to address the needs of those students who demonstrate behavior that is not aligned with our expectations. And so, again, these are the things that we believe have attributed to the very steady decline in the number of suspensions that have occurred. And right now it appears that we have leveled off a bit, but again, that's always something that we will continue to work on. We want an environment where our children are safe, where they feel safe, and where learning can occur. Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned that we're doing more with interventions and counseling for those who have been suspended or would have been suspended. Are we tracking at all how those interventions are affecting or changing student behavior, or if they are?
at schools that, we have some very fine schools that have exemplary models of PBIS, and they have excellent documentation on the number of students that they've met with, the students that they've met with, whether the behavior has recurred with that student. So yes, there are schools that are tracking that very well. There's a PBIS binder that is usually in the counselor's office that records this.
I think it's very good that we're doing these interventions. It's also good that we've cut down on suspensions because obviously students aren't learning while they're out of school. On the other hand, we've got students back in class who are disruptive and behavior problems and making it harder for teachers to teach because they're not out of class. So I'm hoping that we gain proof that these interventions and counseling are really making a difference.
I think our approach is not that no student will ever be suspended.
Yeah.
It's just that suspension is not our first response.
And I would just add that PBIS and also a good standing program that they have in a lot of the high schools are meant to be proactive to prevent the behavior in the first place. For example, in the good standing program, students are found to be in good standing each month, have received some kind of rewards for that. In some schools, they're able to go to games for free or for half price, and different awards that if students can avoid being suspended and not have more than 2 referrals, which kind of addresses the issue of, well, are they just sitting in class still misbehaving because they're not being suspended? But they're rewarded not only for not being suspended, but for not being referred to the office in the first place. And I think a lot of those proactive programming, a lot of that proactive programming has helped prevent the issues in the first place.
Board and the staff we can certainly schedule a discussion or a work session at some point on student discipline. I'm sort of hoping we can get to the student achievement data so that we can see where we're headed and where we're going.
Yes, sir. We are ready. Okay. All right. Well, we will begin with our academic indicators, first beginning with student achievement in reading. Just overall, you will see that our MSA results in elementary reading have remained consistent. We have remained consistent. Proficiency rates in the middle level reading have decreased slightly, but even then, our county still outscores the state in middle level reading. Further, you will see that results from our MAP testing have confirmed our need for the reading strategies that we currently have in place. And then you will also see that our high school students do show growth from the fall to the spring in reading, with 72% of our seniors having achieved the target Lexile of 1185. And so to go a little bit more deeply into this, again, the elementary reading MSA proficiency levels in 2006, 82.7% of our students were proficient in reading. In 2014, it's now 81.9%. We have remained throughout those years in the 80s, having at least 81% of our students being proficient. We have been consistent. And so when we see that, when we looked and we saw that we are consistent, we're not getting more gains, we want to increase proficiency. We looked at how then reading is being taught in the early grades. And so we then looked at some supports for our teachers to teach reading well in the early years. Beth is at the table with us. You know about foundations. I know that the Curriculum and Instruction Committee has had the opportunity to actually go through a lesson in foundations and have found that it is a very effective way to support our teachers in the teaching of reading. We believe that this is a good strategy for us to help gain some proficiency. This current year, foundations will be in every elementary school. We had some schools that volunteered to pilot it previously, but it will be available in every school. We have other strategies that are available as well. Just Words, for example, is another program that is available to students who need more intensive assistance when it comes to reading instruction. You're also familiar with our writing project that's going on, the Calkins Writing Workshop, knowing that every act of writing is an act of reading. So again, it's more opportunities for our students to be exposed to reading. In addition to that, we've emphasized this interdisciplinary literacy approach. So our students, again, are being challenged to read more in every content area. We believe that these things will lead to increased proficiency in reading. Yes, ma'am.
Again, do we have a breakdown on schools for this, for the reading?
We can get you that breakdown.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
I would appreciate that because
Yes.
I understand some of them did exceptionally well, so thank you.
At the middle school level?
Dr. Domingue, excuse
Oh,
me.
yes, sir, I'm sorry.
Just for a second. And I see the, what you're saying as far as the proficient, obviously an advanced or relatively stable. But I also see that running from 2008 up to 2014, there is almost a steady increase of the number of kids that are in the basic level. Is there, any kind of explanation as to why that's happening? Why that number is increasing? I mean, obviously, we'd want to see that consistently dropping, not consistently rising.
When we saw that that number was increasing, that's when we knew that we needed something to help improve the teaching of reading at the elementary level. And so I think it was it 2013 when you first introduced Foundations? And Foundations is a program that is, it provides very specific instruction for the teaching of reading. Again, seeing that basic percent increase, that caused the alarm. So evidently we weren't teaching reading as well as we could have.
But I appreciate that, and I hope that that is a highly successful program. But by the same token, I'm looking at 2008, 2009, which showed, our lowest level of basic. And I'm wondering, what were we doing then that we may not be doing now? What was happening then to allow us to see a steady decline? What's happening now that's showing a reasonably steady increase in that level? I mean, I don't have an explanation. I mean, obviously, kids are different every year. You're going to deal with different kids, but obviously we have to teach them all. And we want to see more in the proficient and advanced. What's different? Why were we doing so well and seeing a steady decline in 2008, 2009, and now all of a sudden we're seeing a pretty significant increase in the last few years?
Well, let me share an observation, and then turn it back to Beth, perhaps for the reading team who's been here for some time. If you look at 2008 as a benchmark year, at about 12% of the kids basic, that comes right after 2007, where 17% or 16% of the kids.
right.
So there's this one-year anomaly, and then ever since then, it almost as if the data is correcting itself. I would hate to have it characterized as correcting itself, but it seems to me that what's happening is we're kind of returning to a historic average. That's not good news for any of us, because what we want to do is keep driving the number of kids that are basic lower, as I think you're saying, Mr. Reidenauer. We can't have 1 in 5 kids who are reading at the basic level. So, maybe someone at the table can offer a thought about why in 2008, Jamie, in 2008 we can why that happened. Was there a change in the assessment in 2008? Was there something different? Or is this a group of really bright kids that move through the school system? Can we see them the rest of the time?
If I could just say that, Dr. Wilcox tells us often that we are built perfectly to get the results that we get, and that I think the programs and things we had in place at that time was a match for the population that we had at that time to get those particular results. I don't think there were significant changes other than the constant turnover of teachers and things that happen naturally. That I know of with the population, though, in the past 6 years, we've gone from 146 homeless students to nearly 550 homeless students. Our farm numbers have increased, and I don't say that as excuses. It means that we had to adapt, and which we're doing, to the new challenge. And so I think we're changing a little bit the way we're built, the curriculum strategy that we're using, so that we can get back on that downward trend toward that number. I think, we sort of maxed out our match of curriculum to population, and that match isn't going to go on forever, and we've seen that it's not, and we're making those changes. I think those changes in curriculum are meant to address the fact that it's not that we're not doing as well as we did then, it's just that it's not as good of a match as it used to be.
See, now that's a good answer. And seriously, and I think that's a great answer for the public to hear. We have, the dynamic has changed for us in the classroom, the number of the kids in the classroom, so we've got to change with it. Thank you, that's perfect.
So instructionally, we have changed. I know that as part of No Child Left Behind, one of the requirements was that we use a research-based basal program. My understanding is we're not using that any longer. That there's more autonomy in the schools. I know that in the Curriculum and Instruction Committee meeting, there was discussion about why Fundation was being used in some schools, but not all schools. So there seems to be some inequity in terms of instructional materials. So it's distressing to me to see that in 6 years, we're not getting the kind of upward movement I would hope that we would be getting. We did take a dip in 2008, and we've just kind of been coasting along, and that's very distressing to me. And with regard to the students that are in that basic level, who are those students? Can we put faces to those students? Are they our special ed, our students with disability? Are they our ELL students? Are they our farm students?
Yes, ma'am.
They're all of those. They're all of those.
They are our
what
students.
should we be doing in terms of intervention for these students? Have we identified the right programs, the right materials? Is summer school the right answer? Do we need to be doing something extended school day for these kids, as opposed to bringing them in and trying to do in summer what didn't happen in 180 days during the school year? So these are some of the questions that that I hope are being addressed and talked about. And
Absolutely. You bring up two things. When I look at the data, the last 2 years in particular, for instance, when you asked about special education and research-based interventions, One of the big changes in the last 2 years has been the change to the qualifications for a reader, a verbatim reader on the assessment. And so we have had fewer in the last year, particularly fewer students who were qualified for a verbatim reader on the MSA. So we were expecting to take a bit of a hit there with our special education population. And you're right, those students who have reading issues need to be in a research-based intervention. And one of our big initiatives in the last year has been a better focus on response to intervention, making certain that we have more focus on identifying students earlier and aligning that with that Tier 1 instruction. So again, that's been our push for foundations in the Tier 1, in the general ed classroom, but then aligning that with the interventions that the students get who need the decoding-based help. Those students, we unfortunately don't know yet how that kind of foundational skills approach is going to help them on MSA. We believe that it's the right approach. We didn't have any third graders who received foundations, of course, this past year, so we can't make that sort of comparison. Next year will be our first, we'll have 6 schools that have third graders who are moving into foundations, a foundations approach. The other thing, actually, I thought that Rick was going to mention about matching population, matching curriculum, has been in the last couple of years. In our move to Common Core, we want our teachers to focus their instruction in Common Core rather than in previous methods. And so there has been more autonomy in the use of the previous round of assessments, which were all aligned with MSA. And so at one point, all of our schools were very faithfully giving their students on a frequent basis assessments that were very closely aligned to MSA. And at any given point, we knew where students were on their progression toward MSA success. But with our movement to Common Core, those assessments did not align with Common Core, and so we had a situation where schools were having to make a decision. Do we go with curriculum and assessments that are aligned, or do we go with those that are not? And so some were still using those benchmarks aligned with MSA, maybe in kind of a looser fashion with their attempts to align their instruction with Common Core, knowing that MSA was coming at the end of the year. So I'm looking particularly at those last 2 years, that would be the case. And with the increase in students who might have had a verbatim reader in the past and did not this past year.
Beth, to build on that a little bit, everyone knows there was a lot of controversy over MSA testing. This past year was the last year for that. And statewide, the conversation is why are we doing something that's, as you just explained, not aligned? Was there confusion in the classroom as to which curriculum to focus on? But we were told the reason to go ahead, the main reason, other than they had already paid for it, instructional reason was that it would still inform our instruction. And I guess what I'd like to know from elementary level, how is it informing? How are the teachers using this? Or has it just been sort of put on the desk, on the shelf, and we're just focusing on Common Core? And so I'm trying to figure out how important are these results to us right now.
There are some results from MSA that we can pull that do match and align with Common Core, that we're able to look at some of the disaggregated data to pull that information to help support our next steps moving forward. So there are some alignment pieces that staff have looked at the past few years as we've made that transition.
English reading rather than math, I understand math was the most misaligned.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I would say in general, we use MSA results as part of a pretty big bank of assessment data from very teacher-created assessments to some other standardized assessments. It's one component to help us. But the data that we get back from MSA is not very, there are only 3 strands. For instance, in reading MSA, we look at general reading processes, we look at literary text, the way students read literary text, and the way they read informational text. That's not very, it's not a whole lot of data for, particularly for a student who's struggling. It doesn't tell us really where that student struggles. If a student struggles in decoding, for instance, or in fluency, we can't tell that from MSA data. So it's one piece that, but it's part of a really bigger bank that we need to look at.
To build on Beth's point, MSA is a summative assessment. It was never designed to be a diagnostic tool that teachers would use in a classroom to modify instruction. Yet there are those who are saying that we ought to use it that way somehow now. The interesting thing is that it's assessment that looks at perhaps a student's skills in 3rd grade, but now they're in 4th grade. Do they still have the same skill deficits? Do they have the same learning needs? So we are going to use the data, but probably not to the extent that some would say we could or in fact should, because we're not going to steer this boat by looking at the wake. We're going to steer this boat by looking ahead at the water that we're entering. So we will, as Beth indicated, use it to some degree, but really this is a summative, not a formative assessment. And so it is like, trying to pilot the boat by looking at the wake.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I wanted to ask a question also about personnel, and are we using our people in the way that is most beneficial to our students? I know at one time we had reading improvement teachers in schools. That position evolved into student achievement specialist. That has evolved into lead teachers. So I'm wondering if we have the right design for teacher leaders, and are those teacher leaders prepared, equipped to do the kind of coaching and mentoring and modeling for the teachers that we have who are seasoned teachers, and for the ones that are coming in new to the system. I worry too that with not having the Center for Peak Performance and Productivity, we don't have those mentor teachers, although we have added 5, I think, back into 4. I worry that with this autonomy that classroom teachers have, that teachers, especially the novice teachers, are coming in not knowing what kind of materials it's not all there at their fingertips, so they're having to seek things out. Many of them are going to the internet and using things from other school systems, either in the state or in the nation, as opposed to things that have been locally developed and tried and true. So I worry about this. We're talking about assessment, but any assessment is going to tell you about the instruction, and if you've got good, sound instruction happening every day, I believe that the assessment will take care of itself. So it's that instruction piece, that curriculum piece that I'm really concerned about. So all that said, do we have the right personnel who are focused on the right things, trained in the right way to help the teachers who need the help the most?
Yes, I believe we do, because researchers have proven again and again the most important factor in student achievement is the teacher in the classroom. Leadership is next. The teacher in the classroom is the most important. And so what we have focused on then is equipping that teacher in the classroom with the materials, with the skills, with the content knowledge even that that teacher needs in order to be successful. We have teachers don't have to search the internet for resources anymore. We have a portal that teachers can go to, the WCPS portal for every content area. And in those content areas and for every grade level, they will find that I think work that will rival that of any other counties. We have model lessons. There are resources that are available. There are model assessments, and that body of work is growing every day. That's an ongoing project for us. So yes, we have materials that are available even on the college and career ready standards related material, and that is continually evolving. We have that in place. We have a process to keep that available to teachers. Again, as we are looking at the data ourselves, we continue at the county level to make sure that we have programs in place that gives teachers the content knowledge that they may be lacking. It may be that universities aren't teaching teachers how to teach reading the way they did 20 years ago. Perhaps. And so we have then in place programs that will help to build their knowledge so that they can do that. We have lead teachers in the building who are there as a support, but again, we want to make sure that the teacher in the classroom has the knowledge, the materials, the resources that he or she needs in order to be successful. And yes, we think that we have mechanisms in place to make sure that is done. Our supervisors have regular visits to schools. They will visit the teachers that are specifically in their content area this year. They maintain close relationships with them, and so when they see that their teacher is struggling, we don't wait until the end of the year to say, oh, this is what you didn't do. We provide support throughout the year. So yes, I do believe that we have the right structures in place. All right, our next slide does show, again, our middle level reading MSA results. And again, same sort of trend that we saw with elementary. And we know that we have, again, an interdisciplinary approach to literacy. We do believe that we are likely to see growth even at the middle level, just as we have described with elementary. This slide shows, this is the comparison that we've alluded to a couple of times, our comparison to the state. At the elementary level, we are just below the state. We are at 81.9% proficient. The state right now is at 84.2. At the middle level, we are slightly above the state with 80.5% of our students being proficient as compared to the state's overall average of 79.6%. So again, our data shows that we are still in need of some strategies to push past the stagnation that we seem to have reached at this point. We believe that we have the right things in place in order to see that growth. Our next slide talks about or shows our performance on the MAP assessment performance growth. Again, this to me, the data simply confirms what we have been saying. You know that MAP produces a score that makes it possible to monitor student growth from year to year along this developmental curriculum scale that NWEA has produced. What they do in order to get the score that is described as the norm, this is where a student should be. They give this test, and then they identify where are most students performing that are on level, and that's determined to be the norm. And then they determine, well, how much growth should this student make throughout the year. And so it's a range of scores that we're looking at continually throughout the year to determine whether or not a student has made growth. So when we are looking at these scores, we look at not only those students who are at or above the norm. We are also concerned about those students that are below the norm, and they may have grown, as the number in yellow represents. They were below the norm, but they did not make the growth that was expected for their performance level. We're also concerned about those students that are represented by the red, those students that were below the norm, but they didn't make the expected growth. And so when we're looking at those numbers and looking at those percentages, again, it shows that there are just, I believe, basic reading skills that we've got to make sure that students get. So again, going back to what our other data have shown us, I believe we have the right things in place. I believe that they are necessary. I believe we still need to continue to support teachers with giving them these resources to make sure that we get gains in the proficiency of our students when it comes to reading.
So, Dr. Domain,
Yes.
if I may just interject here, this is one of those slides that's good news, bad news, right? It's good news if you're one of the kids in blue. For everybody else on this chart, it's not necessarily such good news. Because if you're in green, it means that you're at the expected norm, either because of us or in spite of us, but you didn't grow a full year. You just didn't grow like you should. If you're in yellow, you're below what we expect you to do, but you made some growth, but you're certainly not going to close the achievement gap. You're going to kind of ride along as a second-class citizen in terms of literacy. And then if you're in red, that's really a problem. So we share this data with you to let you know that we're very aware of the challenges that we face, absolutely aware of it. But I would also say part of the good news in this is because you invested in the MAP testing, which is a much more diagnostic tool, we can take a look at the strand level and see how to help these kids improve. Our challenge is getting it from an academic knowledge base to a practical base in a classroom where teachers are acting on this data. And that's where Beth and her team and the lead teachers and others are trying to move people forward. So when we talk about that structural piece, this is the kind of data that will actually inform instruction going forward. And given that we do this test 3 times a year, we have actionable data across the year, beginning in perhaps September. But for our kids who are in summer school, they have MAP Lite, so we have some additional data that helps to drive instruction for them. But again, I just wanted to point out that, you know, it's sometimes when you look at these kind of charts and you see the red, green, yellow, you think, oh, yellow and green are good, and blue must be superior, so everything's good. This is one of those charts that you know, I think you have to kind of look under the hood a little bit to really get a deeper appreciation for it. And that's not meant to throw anybody under the bus. It's simply to say we do look at it that way, because I know as board members you're going to have that question.
Next slide represents our percentage of students who achieve that target Lexile of 1185. 1185 is important because it is the benchmark for college and career readiness in the Common Core. 72% of our seniors this past spring reached that benchmark of 1185. We have students who make that score along the way. This data shows, this data represents 4 different groups of students. Let me make sure that I say that. And so what you see then is, I believe, an increasing percent. You see the increase in percent in the number of students who reach that target Lexile of 1185 every year.
Can I ask kind of a 40,000-foot question?
Yes, sir.
That I think sort of underlies in my, and maybe it's just because I'm not an educator, so help me out. I think it sort of underlies the questions about the MSA results that Mrs. Williams was asking. The this data with the 1185 target and the data that Dr. Wilcox was just talking about with the map. And that is, and I'll start with the map data. If there's a norm, I assume that norm comes from all data from all students who take this assessment,
Correct.
or else it's some other standard that somebody's established for what a student should be able to do. When we talk about a grade level and proficiency, or whether we're talking about that norm, or whether we're talking about 1185 as a target, I think of that as sort of a grade level. And I say, well, what does that mean? Does that mean that that's a skill set or a value that all students should be able to achieve at that grade level? Or does it mean that that's a skill set or an ability that the average student at that grade level should be able to achieve? Because if it's the latter, that means you're always going to have a large group that's below. And I'm not saying that doesn't mean that you don't work really hard to try to get those kids as far up the curve as you can. If it means the former, then it's a meaningless standard. So help me understand what those sort of grade level capabilities should mean when we're looking in the context of these assessments. Does that question make sense? I mean, put more succinctly, is a grade level capability, is it what all students should be able to do, or is it what the average student should be able to do? And what does that tell us about how we review assessments?
It is, this 1185 represents what?
You have something to say, Mrs. Williams?
No,
I'm
I
sorry.
was just thinking in terms of standards. So what you were explaining there, just what we're talking about when we establish these standards, is the expectation that all students reach that standard, or
Right.
just a proportion of them.
And that's,
So-
thank you, because that's sort of the question I'm asking. Because if it's all students should meet the standard, then to me the standard's meaningless, right? Because if everybody can do it, then it's not really a standard. I mean,
Well,
I don't think so.
going back to No Child Left Behind, we had, all students were supposed to reach that.
I understand. I'm
So-
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Dr.
It's okay. This score represents what the average student who is college ready, who is ready to successfully enter a career. This represents like the minimum reading level that they should have.
So is it fair then for a community to expect its school system to have every student reach that standard?
We want all of our students to
I
read.
want all of our students to too, but is it realistic to think that they all will? I mean, we're going to teach all of them as if all of them will.
Well, let me say it this way. I think I can answer the question in a way, as the superintendent, that a staff member probably can't. I don't necessarily believe that all young people are going to learn to the same high level, nor can we teach all kids in a manner that they will all get to the same point. I view these as minimum standards. I do believe that every senior who leaves here can read at a college or career-ready levelness. They can get to 1185. Now, some would probably take exception to that and say, you know what, there are some special needs kids absolutely who can't get there, and there are some other kids who through sheer obstinance aren't going to get there. But, typically what I say to folks who say that, for example, and I'll just tell you, I've said this to you. If a teacher tells me that 30% of their kids can't learn, then what I'm going to tell them is, okay, that's fine that you believe that, but I want you to go tell the parents of those kids which kids can't learn. We have to have the mentality here that they all can. But at some point, I think each of us who have sat in a classroom, and you who have children know that all kids aren't equal. And so it's going to be a tough hoe for us. But I would not, as a superintendent, let one of the people sit in that chair who told me that some kids couldn't learn. If they told me that, they would be looking for different employment.
I think that's absolutely right. But I also want to put it in the context of, while 10%, even 10% in 2008 of kids who were reading at the basic level, while I don't think anybody should be satisfied with that, and while we should look and see what we can do to serve those 10% of kids better,
There is a distribution.
I think we also have to understand there's a distribution. And as hard as we work, and we're going to work as hard as we absolutely can for those kids, but I think there comes a point at which when you beat yourself up as a system, that it becomes non-productive. So I hope I'm making it clear that I'm not saying you give up on kids, and I'm not saying you don't do absolutely everything you can, but we need to understand that just like the ability to throw a baseball, there is a distribution in the ability of kids, and we got to work and try to push everyone as far as they can get. But I'll just leave it there.
Well, Dr. Hardings, if I could just respond a little bit, in addition to, wanting to believe that every single student can reach 1185 or higher, when we look at scores like the MAP assessments where there is a distribution across each grade level, I think the competitive nature of most of the people who work here is that we want our mean to be higher than everybody else's.
Absolutely.
And that's how we can feel good about what we do. And so, yeah, does that mean there's always going to be a range of scores that we have? Always. We're not going to suddenly have everybody in the 100th percentile.
And that's
But
why I bring up the grade
Yeah,
level
yeah,
and the
yeah.
standards idea, because there is a distribution, and the idea that we're going to get every single child over there, again, I'm not saying you don't treat every child as if you're going to, and you don't put all the resources into that child that the child needs to get there, but we have to be realistic about what people's capabilities are.
I think, dovetailing a little bit, I think if you look at what we see up here, the college career readiness, 1185 being, the number that we're shooting for, I think the big thing that we've pushed for in the last few years is growth. I think that's been the word, the catchphrase, and I think what I'm seeing is encouraging, because there is growth, and there's growth from fall to winter to spring. Now, I'd like to see that, everything go up a little bit more each year, but there's growth there. And if that's what we're shooting for, obviously there's going to be somebody starting very low in that classroom. If that person that starts very low makes growth, significant growth, 50%, whatever the case might be, then somebody's doing a good job in that classroom. So I think the fact that we are looking at growth individually for our kids and understanding that some are starting at a level much lower than others. I wouldn't be happy with somebody that starts the year at 1185 staying at 1185. It looks good there, but it doesn't look good to me as a teacher in the classroom. I'd want them to be, significantly higher towards the end of the year. But if somebody starts at a number much, much lower than that and grows at 50, 75, 100%, and still hasn't gotten to 1185, then I think somebody's doing something right. So, I like the fact that on each of those numbers I'm seeing in the spring that there is a growth there. And I'm hoping that, we're pushing from the bottom up also.
Could if I look at that bar graph in the grade 11, which the spring of 14, so this past spring, there'll be 12th graders here this fall. They're, 70% or just below 70% are at that floor of 1185, the minimum. Can we get those 70%, 69% of those 12th graders through Algebra 1, which is PARCC, mandated for the first time, and English 10, which are now being mandated? They won't be HSA now, they're going to be PARCC. Will that 1185 tell us that we're pretty comfortable that that 70% will be able to deal with PARCC?
They should be able to deal with the reading level of PARCC. PARCC will, of course, assess them in a very different way and includes composition skills. So this tells us a little bit of something about how a student may enter a writing assignment, but doesn't tell us how they'll actually perform in regards to the written component. And our students on the literacy assessment Now, of course, those grade 11 students won't take Park because they'll be 12th graders and we won't have that. But the grade 10 will.
That's right, they're starting in
Right,
ninth.
right,
This coming
right.
in. Sorry, I had it
Right,
reversed
that's
down at
okay.
the other end. Same point, but
But
yeah,
it's
50%,
right.
55%.
It will give us an idea of where they start. It gives us an idea of where they start with their reading
My
ability.
concern is because those are mandated tests now, and instead of 4 HSAs, we're going to have 8 parks that are required for graduation. So I'm just wondering how we're going to get them all graduated. Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, have you looked at this data in terms of how Washington County compares to other systems in the state of Maryland with similar demographics? At one time, I knew what those counties were, but that may have,
Just to
I think
compare Charles and
was
Calvert,
one.
were, I think were the two.
Have we looked to
We
know?
don't, this is
have a sense of
completely,
that?
right, this is completely internal data. This is done with our internal scholastic reading inventory. So we don't have access to their data, although the Lexile, which is really a measure of text, the level of text that a student can read with good comprehension, it's more like MAP in that regard, that it's a more nationally standardized sort of assessment. So no, I'm afraid we don't have that kind of comparison data or just access to it, but we can look at how a student compares nationally.
Any other questions related to reading? Okay. All right, thank you. As we move to math, we will share with you that we experienced our anticipated decrease in elementary and middle school math proficiency rates on the MSA. This is something that we have talked to you about previously. However, the middle school proficiency still remain higher than the state's, and the MAP results do confirm our need for continued math interventions. And again, this chart shows how the proficiency levels have changed a little bit over the years. In 2006, 83.3% of our students demonstrating proficiency, whereas now in 2014 we're at 74.7% of our students demonstrating proficiency. Kira can certainly, Dr. Burhans can certainly give you more insight about why this is so, but again, we've talked about the misalignment that we knew was taking place. She can tell you about specific units that students may not have encountered in the curriculum in the classroom that were actually assessed, if you need to hear that. All right, well, we'll move to middle level math results, and again, similar, 77.3% of our students in 2006 were demonstrated proficiency. 2014, that was 71.3%. So again, we knew that we would have some work to do when it came to math. And as I said at the beginning, here are comparisons to the state with, at the elementary level, 74.7% of our students demonstrating proficiency as opposed to 75.8% of the state. At the middle school level, we still outscore the state, 71.3% demonstrating proficiency versus 63.1%. We think that we have good strategies in place to address what's happening in math. It's not only with those proficiency levels, and then here again we have the results from the MAP assessment, and you can see the percentage of students, or the number of students who have not shown any growth. It's looking at these things that we decided to do the interventions, again, that we have in place. Agile Mind that you approved not very long ago, we think will be a very strong contributor to some growth in mathematics, the way that it's taught, engaging the students, making the content relevant and concrete for those students. Kira can also, Dr. Burhans can also tell you about number corners that you've heard about as well. We think that that's also a very good approach in our elementary schools to have them thinking about math in a different way, beginning at the elementary level. I want to also take this time to point out that we have very fine professional development in all of our content areas, but there's an ongoing math institute that you may have heard about from some of your teachers, where they get in-depth content knowledge and also pedagogical support in implementing the new curriculum. So we are approaching how we support teachers in math in a very thoughtful way. We've expended a lot of resources recently for math, believing that we will get gains in math for that. Kira, you want to? Yeah.
I have a question somewhat
Yes.
about that, and that's, I keep hearing from a number of places that the Common Core requires that what the classroom looks like is different. So the way the teacher has to teach is different. Not that the standards are different, but that the way the teacher has to teach is different. That teachers shouldn't teach as much, they should be more facilitators, more students should do more things on their own, reading at home and in small groups in the classroom. And that that's required not because it's our approach to teaching mathematics, but because the Common Core requires it. Can you help me out with that, first of all? And second of all, maybe as an example, a ninth grade geometry class. What is different about the way the Common Core requires the classroom environment to look and that engagement to occur versus the way a non-Common Core geometry class requires the interaction between the student and the teacher to look?
Sure. Well, first of all, that whole perception that Common Core is requiring us to teach differently, it's really aligned with research on mathematics and mathematics teaching and learning. And in Washington County, we started that shift to what we call a student-centered classroom years ago, when Jana Palmer was the supervisor for elementary math and science, which I think was at least 10 years ago. That shift really started, and April was making that shift with the secondary folks as well. So it's really about, yes, the teacher's the facilitator, but it's also about balance in the classroom. So we've never said there's never a time when I, as the teacher, should be doing direct instruction, but it's about balance. How do I facilitate my classroom so that my students are problem solving more real-world type problems than let's do numbers 1 to 50 odd, check it in the back of your book when you're finished. So it's more about how do I ensure that my students are understanding the mathematical concepts and then applying that to solve the algorithm. So how does that look different in, say, a high school course? Dr. Demain talked about Agile Mind and how Agile Mind will support that. As you know, not all of our teachers will be using Agile Mind. So we have resources through our portal and that we've developed in the last years through culling resources that are available for our teachers to support them in teaching in a more problem-based way. But again, not every lesson would be a problem-based lesson. It's about how do I get my students to understand these concepts, to solve problems, and then use them to solve problems using the algorithm. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Could I ask the number of basic students scoring basic in the middle school? I'm wondering if you have any anecdotal information as to what teachers were hearing when these youngsters were about to take the test. I'm going back to Mrs. Brightman's question about you know, the test isn't going to count, it's not important, so on and so forth. Was there any anecdotal information garnered from teachers that students had that type of attitude in taking the test?
I don't have any anecdotal information that was communicated
I've heard some
to
on
students.
the street, but I don't know how valid it is, that, you know, that kids were saying, you know, this is not important, we'll just do it and get it out of the way. And I thought maybe that had something to do with that percentage of basic and the drop from in the advanced level.
You know, not to my knowledge, Mr. Bailey. I do know, you know, students did know that some of them weren't taking the MSA because they were taking the Park Field test. So you have, not all of our students are represented in this data. So that could also be a variable that's out there.
And my other comment or question is, a long time ago, a teacher could graduate from a teacher college in elementary education with a course in teaching of arithmetic. And that was one of the dreaded courses, you know. It was so boring, teaching of arithmetic. What are colleges doing now in preparation to prepare elementary teachers, particularly to teach what I call a more sophisticated mathematics program? What are they doing? Are they doing anything different?
Well, in a review of research on that, it varies from college to college. For example, McDaniel College has some exceptional instructors in regards to that elementary teacher education and preparation in mathematics. We continue to communicate with our local colleges in supporting them in what they're doing for teacher preparation for mathematics. But clearly, when you look at college education and pre-service teaching, that is an area that research shows we need as a nation to continue to develop.
Our experience confirms that as well, Mr. Bailey. That's why we send content-specific persons out on the recruiting events that we have, just so that we can get a feel for the kind of content knowledge that a prospective teacher may have before they come here. And, you know, I have heard those persons on those recruiting trips say that, you know, when we go to certain places, we know that their background on the Common Core may not be there. Their level of understanding about the career and college and career ready standards is simply not there, just because they haven't been exposed to it for whatever reason. So we do know that there is a variation among what's coming from our
My
colleges.
thinking is not very popular, but I still feel that that beginning in third grade, we need people who are specialists in math, teaching mathematics.
And Mr. Bailey, I've served on a committee that has looked at that, and Maryland actually does have a, we've worked to develop a math specialist certification. So that's something that has been looked at.
But I think, Mr. Bailey, you've identified one of the challenges, and I know, you know, to the chagrin of some of my team members, I continually to talk about content knowledge and background as opposed to pedagogy. You know, earlier the reference was made to CP3, which was, I think, probably a great organization during its day. But they spent a lot of time talking about pedagogy, how best to teach things. They talked about Ruby Payne and how to teach children from an impoverished environment, all things that are important. And in fact, some of that's rearing its head for us again, that we probably have to get back to some of that around cultural competence and some of these other issues. But the fact is that I think that we don't have some of the subject area expertise at key points in young people's lives. I think in a little while you're going to hear from Sandy Graff. She would probably tell you that most colleges and universities don't provide the level of science that a student, that a teacher must have today to help us meet our next generation science standards. Some of the kids just don't have that. I mean, they have maybe an introductory science class, but have they really had the hard science classes of chemistry? Have they had a class that combines, some of the higher level math with the science? Probably not. So, again, what you're seeing us do is move away from, and the pendulums always swing a little bit too far before they right themselves, but we're moving away from some of the pedagogically based in-service and professional development towards more content-specific professional development, like the Math Institute and some things, because we think that that's where we're going to get our greatest leverage. But those are not overnight strategies, and they're going to take time for us to really harvest the fruit from them. And it's not just, and I don't want to just put poor Sandy out there because she's coming up next, and I've set the table for her, but I think it's true in the area of mathematics. As you push algebraic thinking down into the elementary school, teachers who have been trained in arithmetic are really going to find themselves lacking. So, I think this is a problem that's larger than one school district, but it's certainly one that we can't shy away from addressing. Okay. I'll let you keep moving on just in the interest of time.
Our next meeting is supposed to convene in 5 minutes, so
We can continue this if the board would like, and come back.
That's fine. I just want to make sure the board members have a chance to have a break between meetings, but I do want to try to get through all this material. So if it's okay with the whole board, we'll keep going until maybe we'll try to convene our next meeting at 10:45, so that give us an extra 15 minutes. Anybody have objection to that?
That works.
Getting a whole lot of blank stares.
No appointment of
It's
you all.
fine. Let's
Yeah,
do
so
15
let's go.
minutes. Yeah.
All right.
Blank stares, but no objections.
Okay. Thank you, Kira. Very quickly, moving on to science, I will tell you elementary and middle school science demonstrated decreased proficiency rates. However, our middle school science proficiency rate is still higher than that of the states. Again, you see just the consistency. That's what we continue to produce. There is the comparison to the states. Sandy, if you will give us some insight as it relates to our science scores.
Dr. Wilcox just pointed out, excuse me, an ongoing problem with science, especially at the elementary level, and that's just the level of understanding, of deep understanding of content with the teachers. But what we've seen happening with the MSA recently in science is that as the whole system and the whole state focused on Common Core standards, we moved science toward really focusing in professional development and instructionally in supporting the Common Core literacy standards, which means a lot more reading and writing in the science classroom. But what happened as a result of that is that we reduced the time in many schools for actual science content instruction. It's a balancing act, and there's only so much time. So I think in the long run, what we've done for students is really encourage and support their literacy skills, which do support science skills. But I think what we've come to the conclusion with is that we need to really refocus back on the science content instruction and the science professional development in content for teachers. At this point in time, we have the opportunity to do that through the introduction of the Next Generation Science Standards as a complete process that will move forward over the next 3 years. And in introducing the Next Generation Science Standards, we're starting with the primary grades, which we'll be moving toward that this year, and high school earth science. And I know we've presented this to the curriculum committee. We'll do another third of the courses, elementary to middle school grades, and several more high school courses next year, and follow with the rest of the science courses in the 16-17 school year. So in 3 years, we will have the entire system moved to the new standards, which also includes new instructional methods. And as part of that, we'll provide intensive professional development and seek out resources for teachers to support that science content instruction, as well as the literacy emphasis.
Sandy, but in the meantime, we're going to continue the MSA science assessments at least next year, is my understanding, if not the following year, because they're mandated by No Child Left Behind to still
Right.
have science assessment.
Thank you for saying that. MSA Science is not following the same path as Language Arts and Math. MSA Science, the assessment that you're seeing the results of here will continue into the foreseeable future until the state makes a decision to change it. So students next year will be tested in grades 5 and 8 for MSA Science, which is based on the old standards and the old content. At this point, our transition plan is to leave the classes in place that will be tested in MSA until that third year. So we'll maintain the current instruction with the past standards now, as long as we can. But at that point, we will have an absolute disconnect, as Language Arts and Math have, between what's being tested and what's being taught at each grade level.
So that gap will come in 3 years.
3 years. Thank you.
Thank you.
Would it be possible to take the advanced placement course discussion, just so we can wrap this up, and move all of it to one time? So we talk about our AP scores, our IB scores, our gifted learner program and stuff. So I'm trying to buy you a little time, Jessica. Would that be possible for the board?
In a business meeting,
Either put it in a business meeting presentation or perhaps another workshop if the business meeting is not sufficient.
fine with me.
Yes, because there's still a lot of material and questions. Yeah.
All right, so could we hold on that part, but let the board just ask any general questions you have now about what you've heard or talked about today? Jessica, thank you.
I have one sort of general question right off the bat. As I've been reading the results of the states who have implemented the park this year, and there are a few of them, there's a lot of shock among those states by what people think they show. So I think I read in one state that and I don't know if it doesn't go by basic, proficient, advanced, there's some other term of art for it, but essentially the number of students scoring proficient, what we would now call proficient or advanced, on a park assessment in a state that implemented it this year was in the 30s of percent.
Mm-hmm.
And then 65 or 70% were what we would now call basic or not proficient. Same kids taking the test 1 year to their assessment, 1 year to I'm calling it a test, I'm not an educator. Same kids taking the test 1 year to the next, but the scores look like the bottom has fallen out. What should we expect next year?
We know.
Because that's going to be a big shock to a lot of parents. It's
It
going to
will.
be a shock to kids. I think it's going to be a shock to teachers, probably going to be a
Business
shock to a lot of
community.
people in this room. And I just want to start to have that conversation so that we and the team and the community is prepared for it.
Yes. Well, we have continued even beyond this past year. When I joined you, the conversation started about how different and how much more rigorous the park testing is. We continue to share that information with our leaders, with our teachers, and with the community. We know that, for example, in English, on those previous assessments, there would be a close reading of one text. Well, now you have 2 or 3, and you are comparing and analyzing and contrasting, and not only are you answering maybe multiple choice questions about them, you are composing a response. It is much more rigorous. It's much more challenging. That's why we are changing the approach to instruction in the classroom. We are trying our best to prepare everybody for that shift because it is very different.
But we think the drop is going to be significant. I don't think there's anybody here that thinks that our scores will stabilize and begin to rise in 2 years, or perhaps even 3 years before we really get the first results back where kids have been fully immersed in this Common Core or Maryland Core approach. It's going to be a very bumpy ride. Mr. Akers. He's been kind of the designee to the park assessment group that's meeting. Rick, I mean, do you concur with that, or am I off base?
Yes, I think one of the advantages of park, because last I checked, I think there's 18 states still hanging on to park, and which is going to give us a pretty big comparison group to see how we're doing relative to others, because it's not a state-specific test. But there is a little bit of a feeling of we're shooting in the dark as far as preparing teachers and students for success. I mean, we've done everything we can to be aware of the standards that it's purported to measure, but you know, there's a little bit of mystery there between you know, the park folks' interpretation of how to assess the Common Core and our interpretation. So there's a, you know, there's been a lot of professional judgment, I guess, in every school district involved in the Common Core transition and one of the two different assessments. So yeah, I mean, do I sometimes lose a little sleep over thinking what the first results are going to look like? But I'm also very confident that we're definitely, you know, we may not have hit the bullseye in every bit of curriculum we've created or every bit of programming we've done, but I think we've definitely, you know, headed in the right direction and stayed up to date on everything. So I don't think our slip is going to be, you know, greater than anyone else's, but I think everybody is going to experience
It's
slip.
going to be a massive communication problem, or challenge, not problem, opportunity. Because I
Rated
think
that
there are
one.
going to be a lot, I mean, there are going to be a lot of students and a lot of parents who have seen their child every year score advanced, proficient, advanced on everything. And they may very well get scores the following year that say that they're behind or basic. And that's going to make a lot of people's eyes pop out and wonder what happened. And I think we know the answer. It's what I was referring to before. It's the standards changing and where on that distribution you end up. But that's a massive communication opportunity for us to.
Oh, and Dr. Hardings, it's you know, the sad reality is it's not just the students who are going to see this and their parents who see this, but even our teachers. As we recalibrate our SLOs, we're going to see teachers who enter our previous administration of our assessment system were always rated at the top of their game. But as we recalibrate some of these SLOs, teachers who have prior to this found themselves doing exceptionally well in our evaluation system are going to find themselves probably not rated as highly as they were before. So this district has an awful lot of communication ahead of it to simply say that any one moment in time marks our label of you. We're going to have to convince an entire community that we're using a variety of metrics over a variety of time to demonstrate not just kind of a final point, but a step on a longer journey. So we have a lot of work ahead of us.
But I have a little problem with the idea of what can't be measured doesn't matter. Because I think that makes us all about testing rather than the individual child. And I think there are a lot of things in life that can't be measured that are very valuable. So when I look at a school classroom and a school climate, and I know that only the tested subjects, those teachers are going to be evaluated on that growth. But if we sort of take that and set it over in the parking lot for a while, I'd like to see every teacher, whether it's a phys ed teacher, science teacher, history teacher, whatever the content subject is, take ownership of that child and say, what can we do as a team to help this child find their own opportunity? And it may not be advanced, may not be proficient, it may be what that child can do, but we need to be able to almost do an individual ownership. And we can't just let a teacher, and I'm not sure this is going to come across, off the hook just because they're not being evaluated on a measurement.
So, Mrs. Brightman, a couple of things. First, we're working very hard in the system, and this is to Mrs. Williams' point, which I think she made exceptionally well. If we take care of the core curriculum, if we teach kids well, the tests will take care of themselves. We are not, I will tell you, we are not preparing our kids to take the PARCC exams. We're preparing our kids for a better life beyond school, for the college and career of their future. We're not preparing them to take PARCC. We really, I don't want to say we don't care, because it's what we're judged by a lot of people in society, but that's not why we do it. And I think Mrs. Williams was absolutely right on in terms of saying that. And that's something that I say to our team on a regular basis. And it's great that we have the opportunity to say it in a public discussion so that they know that we're not talking differently to board members than we are to them. We'll be saying something very similar again tomorrow morning with all of our assembled administrators here. Let's teach our curriculum well. And that's our first and foremost job. The second thing is that all teachers do have some responsibility for students in our schools because of our adoption of the SLOs. Every teacher can see themselves in the success of a student. I will tell you that does cause some frustration, because if you are, for example, a teacher in the fine arts area and you're now held accountable for a student's achievement in literacy, you wonder, well, how does that happen? But what we're saying is, if you are teaching a play or a theater, you're a teacher of the language and lexicon of the theater, and kids should see themselves in that. And we hope the PARCC assessments are sophisticated enough to recognize that going forward. Interestingly, and this will be my last comment on it unless I'm provoked again, as I stepped out a moment ago, I said to Dr. Miles, "Aren't you glad you're not here in a tested subject?" And his response was, "Oh, yeah." But then as I sat back down and said, his kids are tested every single performance, the most authentic assessment of their skill that you can have, as the kids are in the play. When they step out onto the stage, they are being tested. So, you know, as a system, I think we're going to try to find more opportunities for our kids to demonstrate their competence based on great instruction. And those things, I think, will be demonstrated to you as board members as you get out in the community, talk with your constituents or attend our events. Our athletes are graded every Friday night. And so are their coaches. And all of you know that you've been to an event when the kids lost and you went home, and perhaps you didn't, but as a parent I did once or twice, and said, that coach couldn't coach a lick. I evaluated that coach based on my student's performance. It was wrong, but it's what I did. Mr. Ridenauer knows, as a former basketball coach, 18 times a year people got to judge his performance as well as his kids. So Mr. Bailey knows the same. So,
Thank you.
thank you.
Other comments or questions? I want to thank the staff very much. Thank you, Dr. Wilcox, for the report. You clearly can tell that I think the board's engaged in this type of conversation. So
Maybe Dr. Domain could introduce the rest of the team that we didn't.
Before
get to.
Dr. Domain does that, I just want to thank all of the staff members who came today, because the curriculum team does a great job day in and day out. And they don't always get the accolades, particularly from me, but also from the board, that they so richly deserve. So I want to thank all of you for being here today, and also thank some of you for putting up with some of my tirades the last few weeks. But
I wonder who that was. I want to introduce.
not so much you, though, Dr. Domain.
I want to share, you know, Beth Downen, our supervisor of English. This is Dr. Kara Burhans, our supervisor of math. It was Jessica Reinhardt, our supervisor of advanced programs, gifted and talented education. Sandy Graff, our supervisor of science. That is Evelyn Williams, our supervisor of social studies. Behind Ms. Williams, we have Ms. Paula Moore, who is our supervisor of world languages and ELL. This is Adrian Marinado, our supervisor of special education. And then we have Ms. Thank you, Stacy. It just escaped me. I'm sorry. Stacy Henson, preschool supervisor. Mr. Marty Potash, who for writing. Ms. Carol Costello, student services. And is that everybody? And of course, Rick Akers, secondary education, Matt Semler, elementary education, Maureen Margovich for testing and accountability.
Thank you.
It's a great team. Testing my memory.
all right. If there's nothing further, we'll adjourn and we'll reconvene in 5 to 10 minutes. I want to be sure everybody has time to take the appropriate break.